So I think I want to begin today with a shout out to Terry and Paul for that first reading. How about it for those names? So when you think you've got an unusual name, just think back, right? So, so here we are at the final Sunday of 2021, and the day that we celebrate all families. I thought it would be fun to do something a little bit different today. So we're going to. If we think about it, you know, Jesus's birth was a little bit unpredictable, right? We got a young, single, unmarried mother, no place to hang out when the baby comes. Ultimately, the family has to leave the country seeking asylum. So I thought rather than listening to my perspective, it would be better today to hear everyone else's. So here's what we're going to do. We'll begin with 1 minute of silence for reflection, and then anyone will have an opportunity to share. In our Eucharistic prayer today, as we have at a number of other times, we actually ask to acknowledge the presence of the sacred in the places where we are reluctant to look for it, in the stables of our lives, the lives that we live, among the downtrodden in our society, and in refugees, and all those that we see as different than us. So the question I would ask you to reflect on is, where do you find the sacred in your life? So is everyone clear? We're going to take 1 minute of silence, and then we'll just move right into homily reflection. And Peg, you get to manage the crowd of folks sharing. Wonderful. Thank you. At the end of our 1 minute, we'll have a chime.
I would like to start. My sister, who is 2 years older than me, is retired, and she goes to St. Francis Inn every week to feed the homeless. And some of the stories are so heartbreaking, and I just find it so inspiring that she and her husband are willing to come from New Jersey and go into the Badlands of Philadelphia, and just are so kind. And on Christmas Eve, if they don't have enough volunteers, they have to just serve the people outside. They can't bring them inside. And my sister has hosted Christmas Eve every year since she was married for the family. So they served lunch, and then she came home and got ready for the family gathering. And I just see that as such Christ-like behavior, and to me that's where the sacred is. And then I see it with Sister Pat and her outreach that she does, and it always kind of pricks at my conscience a little bit that I should be doing more. So this is a really good reflection for this last Sunday of the year. Thank you. Mel, go ahead.
Thank you, Peg. Where do I find the sacred? For the past year and a half, July of 2020, during the pandemic, there's 4 of us who facilitate an LGBTQ spiritual group. It's not my other ministry is a Catholic group, but this is just a spiritual group that we've been Zooming for a year and a half, and it's for for anyone. You know, we've recently had someone Zoom in from Richmond, Virginia and Michigan. And I can't tell you how much it is where I come off of those Zooms saying, this is church. This is definitely church. It's a group of folks who are so harmed and hurt and are just longing for community. So I'm feeling very blessed to be and humbled to be part of the facilitation for it, because I do feel it's providing a space for folks who aren't getting it from their own blood families. They're finding their chosen families and finding their chosen community. And it's called Breathe is the name of the group. We gather once a month. So that's just being in the presence of folks and being able to honor them is truly humbling. So.
And the word was made flesh and dwells among us. I have heard those words for so many years, and it usually takes you to some kind of theological level. But I had heard a very lovely, and maybe some of you, radio program this morning. Krista Tibbetts had a man on who had a very dear friend, and I could not understand the name of the woman. She was an evangelical, but she was a thinking, thoughtful evangelical who was very involved in social justice. But she wrote a very beautiful commentary, and it took me to a place, and maybe it's because I was a nurse midwife. It was just very profound and beautiful, and I'll just share it with you. He talked, or she in her writing talked of thinking about the fact that Jesus was an embryo that embedded in a woman's womb and went through all the development and came out bloodied through the birth canal. And then she recorded or wrote about how the little infant would have just been looking up in his mother's eyes, and how the little fat arm would have been above his head. And she talked about how eventually how it was only because of a woman that God came into the world as Jesus. So it's very simple, but it touched me very much, because we can get up in the heights about all these things, and the reality that our God was an embryo that implanted and grew and developed in all the ways that you and I grew and developed.
Mike Kernicki.
Well, I got entangled with a group called Handicapped Encounter Christ. My sister from birth was a victim of cerebral palsy. And I took her one time up to Villanova, and she came across Sean Tracy, a priest there, who spent a weekend up there, up in New York, when he was first exposed to Handicapped Encounter Christ group. And they take in disabled people and present a weekend retreat for them. Because most of the places that have a retreat house are not handicapped accessible. So we have to hunt around for a place to hold our event. And each person has a role. They either work in the kitchen or help feed the ones that can't feed themselves, or they prepare the food, or they work with the liturgies that we have. And there's a lot of things that were different from my normal parish activities. Comes communion time, you know, everybody gets communion, and it takes a while to accomplish. They drink from the cup, and they get a piece of bread that somebody baked. So we all got involved in all the activities of the on the weekend, and we got to know a lot of people that were pretty disabled, and they enjoyed a weekend that they had never had before. And I expect that Christ was present to us all at that point. And it continued on and grew and ended up in Philadelphia. And my sister was kind of an administrator. She used to be the place, even though she was she had to stay at home all the time, and she was the one that they called or they sent a letter to. She was a contact person for a whole bunch of people from around Philadelphia that had been in a nursing home for handicapped. And they didn't like to use the word handicapped. They disabled. They were a disabled person. And we try to treat them with as much dignity where they were missing, and kind of like, I forget who the previous talker was, but she was talking about the LGBT people, how they're treated in an unjust manner. Well, handicapped too. Just because you're walking with a cane, you still get shuffled around, and people fighting to get the front of the line and stuff like that, you know. So, but anyway, it was a great experience, and that's where I started getting the feel for being one of the persons that were involved in the administration of the Eucharist and things like that. You know, we were able to touch vessels that we weren't able to touch before, and it wasn't looked upon as being anything out of the ordinary, because everybody, even disabled people, were able to be part of the liturgy too, and it made everybody feel kind of equal, you know. So I guess that's it.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
When Kathy was talking earlier, 2 words that stood out were family and refugees. The Holy Family was a refugee from political violence, and we know that story well. But today there are 84 million people who are refugees, who are most often homeless, certainly stateless. And I've had the privilege of working with some of those people from Central America, from Africa, from Central Asia, Afghanistan in particular. And one thing that strikes me is that while some of these people have access to modern transportation and came here by plane, others walked. They came up through Colombia, through the Darien Gap, where many people lose their lives, through Central America, and climbed over the high wall that divides our country from Mexico. When they're here, they find some kind of tentative refuge. But what they lose in the process is the families that they left behind. And I know from working with some of these people how poignant that is, how hard it is, because finding refuge means leaving your family. And in that understanding of how universal that is, how it is not something that through the ages we've been able to rectify in our world. It remains a challenge for all of us. And within that challenge, I find sacred.
Pat McKittrick?
Thank you. I'd just like to share a little experience that I've had yesterday, especially. I guess it's every day. I find God is so present in our world and in the people that I meet. And I picked a woman up yesterday morning because she was alone and said, do you want to come and help me deliver some meals? And so she came out and she said, I have a gift for you. I made you a snowflake. And it just touched me, a snowflake, so I said, well, I appreciated it and took her around, and we stopped. It was hard to find any place to get coffee and things like that, but we picked up coffee and rode around for a little bit, and then I got to where I was supposed to pick up the meals, and it was glare ice. And I thought, I just can't risk it breaking a hip or something. Anyway, I parked outside the place. We got there an hour early because we figured the line would be long. And there was a gentleman out putting salt. And I said to him, I'm really afraid to walk over there. He said, no one should walk here. He said, I volunteer here. And he was throwing the salt around. And he said, I can get that for you. And I was like, just so touched that he would even be willing to do that. And then we left there, and it started to kind of rain and sleet, and it was nasty out. And I pulled up to the hospital under the canopy so I could reshuffle some things in the car and get to them more easily when I had to make drop-offs. And one of the guys that I know at the hospital says, Sister Pat, you want to come in? I said, oh, maybe I'll run in and get a couple of extra pizzas. And he said, we don't have pizza today. I was going to add that to my thing because the meals that I had picked up were cold and I thought they were going to be heated, and they weren't. So he said, do you want to come in? I said, well, let me finish doing what I'm here. And so he went in, but then I didn't realize you needed a card to get in. You had to swipe to get in, and I didn't have mine with me. And a woman pulled up right behind me, and she said, did you want to go inside? And I was like, yeah, I think I do. So I went in, and Stacy and I both went in, and we picked up some extra meals, and we were online to pay for them. And a woman ahead of me turned around and she said to the woman at the cash register, these are on me. And she paid for the meals. And I was just so touched by the kindness all day of the people. And then one of the refugee people that I bring meals to and have helped for a while came out to the car, and he said, I have something for you. He said, a sandwich. And I was just so touched by the kindness and the things that happen. And it's like every day God is present in all the people I meet and in the situation. And I said, today I'm staying home. And a friend wrote to me and she said, that's God's way of telling you, I'm giving you ice today, so you stay home and don't go out and just enjoy the day. And it's just a blessing. And, the one other thing I want to say before it's long is I'm very grateful for my brother and sister-in-law who collect most of the year some money, and they just put their change aside and they collect enough to donate a meal to some of the homeless people down in their parish. It's not really their parish, another parish. And they picked up 78 cents of I'm smiling because I see ice grippers for me. That's true. But they picked up 78 pairs of gloves and mittens and hats and things to bring to the homeless to serve with the meal. So, there's just so many good people and doing so many good things. And I think that's God's presence all around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
When Kathy posed the question, I couldn't help but think of the words from scripture, the reign of God is within you, and the words from the Quran, everywhere I turn, I see the face of God. And I'd like to share two brief examples, one this morning, and this one is from nature. I was finishing my walk and I heard this whoosh come past me. It was a hawk who had been in the bushes. There was some rustling. And then the hawk whooshed past me and landed in our October glory tree. And I thought, ooh, I bet there's something in there that this hawk was feeding on. And then I saw the squirrel scamper away. And I couldn't help but think how God is there in the struggle of life, because each, the hawk and the squirrel, were wanting to live. And the other is our two grandsons. And we really enjoyed seeing them yesterday. And to just hold them and look into their eyes and hear their coos, I couldn't help but see the face of God in these new lives.
I'll just take another minute and go in the opposite direction and just be on the receiving end of the sacred. And when we can accept with humility when we need help And especially with aging, we see that we're more vulnerable than we used to be. And to be able to accept that as God's way of taking care of us and seeing the sacred in that and just being humble. Thank you. Joan and Paul?
Well, I would like to tell you about something that happened maybe 3 Sundays ago. We have a lot of turnover in our neighborhood and 3 houses, but this was one that I didn't realize had new neighbors. They knocked at the door. It was a Sunday evening. I think we were eating dinner. And they had a little boy who was about 3 months offered us a bag of cookies. I've never encountered that. I've been a new neighbor so many times we've moved, but the courage to just go door to door in the neighborhood and present people with cookies, and attached to it was a little paper with their names on it, their contact information, their address. It blew me away. And I really felt like, that was the face of God in such a small way, but powerful. And it's still with me 3 weeks later. I wanted to share that.
And Peg, if I can piggyback on that, couple brief things. First of all, I'm deeply humbled and just blown away by what everyone has shared so far. It's been a great blessing. I guess, Peg, I kind of feel the way what you expressed when you started talking about your sister, but listening to everyone who has shared so far. As a university professor, I work in a place of privilege, and I work with very privileged people. But I try to remember every time I go into the classroom that, the words from Michael Jonkis, which here in our midst, we touch God's human face. And I've seen that in my students for more than 3.5 decades. Today we read from the genealogy, and I am literally, at the point where I'm teaching the children of people I've taught before. And which gives me a deeper appreciation for genealogies. And I'll just I'm just grateful because I've had so many wonderful students, and I could go on a long time, but I won't. And so I see God in their face. Though I will end on this note, because my degree, my doctorate's in the New Testament studies, teach genealogies a lot. And I've tried over all these years to have my students name their children after some of the people we hear in the genealogies, but I haven't had any takers yet.